Hello everyone, my name is David Kiernan and I'm a Curriculum Officer at NCFE, and you're welcome to this webinar for the Unit 2 of the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design. And I'm joined today by Leslie Davis, one of our external quality assurers and a subject specialist in graphic design. And the plan for today's webinar is to give an overview of this vCert qualification, as well as some of the latest COVID-19 information, a summary of the learning outcomes and grading descriptors for Unit 2. We'll look at some example learner work, and finally address any questions that you may have. Although throughout this webinar, please do submit questions via the chat box, as we will be answering them throughout this webinar. But first, just want to begin with a very quick poll regarding your current confidence with the assessment and grading of Unit 2. So how would you put your confidence at the minute? Very quick at answering this, quite low for some people. Most seem to be around the 3 to 4 mark. Okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to help and get you feeling a little bit more confident with the graphic design at the minute. I'll just give it another 20 seconds maybe, and then I'll close off this poll. A few others people in a bit of a higher bracket, the 7 to 8 bracket. Okay. So a bit of a mixed bag between 3 to 4s and 7 to 8s. Well, let's begin with, first of all, just a beginning and overview of this qualification. As I know, it might be brand new to some people who are on here. If you do need more comprehensive information, because this is going to be brief, we do have induction webinars for the Level 1 and Level 2 technical awards. But we'll begin just with this brief overview and some COVID-19 information as well. So the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design consists of two elements: the external assessment, which is worth 50% of the final grade, and the internally assessed coursework, which is worth the other 50%. The graphic design does consist of 4 units, and each of these units will be internally assessed with the coursework. As well as this, the first 3 units are also externally assessed with the invigilated external assessment. Learners are entitled to 1 resubmission of their internal assessments following the EQA visits. And if your learners are doing the Level 2 qualification, the Level 2 Technical Award in Graphic Design, then they will need to achieve a minimum of a Level 2 pass in each internal assessment and in the external assessment in order to get the Level 2 qualification overall. QualHub will be your primary go-to. That's what the website looks like. So you can just type in graphic design, you can type in the full title or qualification code, and it should bring you to your QualHub subject page. Now, as we're focusing on the internal assessments for this, I just want to highlight that for the internal assessments, we do have some assignments ready for you to use on the graphic design QualHub page. So there are tasks, internally assessed tasks for each of the units, Unit 1, 2, 3, and 4. You may wish to change aspects of the scenario that it's set in so that it's more suitably contextualized for your learners, but they are there ready for you to use. And here's an example of one. And the first thing you will see on the brief is going to be a scenario. And this is designed to give a real life situation in order to help set the assignment in context. As I mentioned, you may want to change that so it's more suitable for your learners. After that, the assignment gives further details on the specific information that learners should be including. Then we have the ways that the evidence can be presented, and we've tried to keep this as open as possible to appeal to many different types of learners. Then on the following page, we do have the grade descriptors. And this is what the learners will see, these grade descriptors as well. And this is what they need to do for a past merit distinction to meet those criteria. This is what the assessor is going to be using when marking the work. And it's also what your external quality assurer, your EQA, is going to be using when it comes to reviewing the work. Now, each unit consists of 3 learning outcomes, and each learning outcome must be graded. So to get a pass in a unit, the learner needs to achieve a minimum of a pass for each of the learning outcomes. So the same competency, the same level of competency has to be demonstrated in each learning outcome if we're to judge the entire unit to be at that same minimum level of competency. So if they get a pass in one learning outcome and merits in the other 2, like shown, then the overall grade for that unit is still going to be a pass. So there is no compensatory grading system when it comes to marking a single unit, but when it comes to combining all the units together, it works out differently. There is a compensatory system when coming up with a total grade overall. Now, if you're currently delivering this qualification, then undoubtedly you've been affected by some extent by the COVID-19 pandemic. And here's a brief update on the current situation. So Ofqual published the VCRF, that's going to be the Vocational Awarding Framework, last Wednesday on the 24th. And that is what has to be followed when it comes to awarding vocational qualifications. And we've had to apply that framework to our qualifications. And this qualification can be assessed by teacher assessed grades, or TAGs for short. But please do continue with internal assessments wherever possible. That's going to be really useful evidence. And so do please continue with them. The external assessments for this academic year, they have been cancelled, so they will need to be assessed by a teacher assessed grade. So this is another reason why it's useful to make sure you can get as much of the internal assessments done, because you can use the internal assessments to make a judgment on the external assessment grade. If your learner already has a banked external assessment grade, or maybe they were given a CAG, a centre assessed grade last academic year, then a tag doesn't need to be submitted. This is also true for any internal assessments. If any of their internal assessments already have banked grades or were given a CAG last year, if they were mid-flight learners, for example, then a tag isn't needed. Although, if learners would have been entitled to resit the external assessment or have a resubmission of their internal assessments, then you may end up submitting a tag for those learners. Now, one of the key things is all assessment components, external and internal assessments, need to have either a grade, regular standard grade submitted, or if it's incomplete, a tag submitted for the qualification to be awarded. But there must be enough evidence there for you to base a judgment on. So they have to have evidence there for you to judge and make a tag submission on. If any element is missing that hasn't been taught, there's not evidence for, then you won't be able to submit a tag for that unit. This means that learners would not be awarded the qualification. So you should identify any assessment components that is lacking evidence, and if there is a unit that hasn't been taught, then you should identify these areas and make every effort to generate sufficient evidence in the time remaining through continued teaching, learning, and assessment in order to allow for a teacher assessed grade to be submitted. Now, so units don't need to be completed, but as I said, there should be sufficient evidence to base a judgment on. And your EQA, your external quality assurer, they're going to be a valuable source of information, so do seek out support and guidance from them as well. As for mid-flight learners, so those in the first year of a 2-year course, or maybe if you're delivering over 3 years, then it's those in year 1 or year 2 of delivery, such as year 10 learners or year 9 learners, they can have tags submitted as well. So for any assessments they would have completed this academic year, 1st of August 2020 to the 31st of August 2021, this entire academic year, they can have tags submitted. But likewise, it has to be based on evidence. So tags can be submitted for those learners for internal assessments or external assessments, but you need to have evidence to make those judgments. And the tag portal, the tag window, is going to be available from mid-April to mid-June. So at any point during that time, you'll be able to submit tags. But as I said, do seek out guidance and support from your EQA as well. And if you have any questions, do pop them into the question box. So I'm just going to check if there are any questions at this point. I don't think there are. I haven't seen any flash up. No, none at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I am going to hand over to Leslie Davis, who will be able to talk you through the learning outcomes for graphic design Unit 2.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar this afternoon. It's good to have you here. So this afternoon, we're going to look at Unit 2, Graphic Design Practice. And this unit consists of 3 learning outcomes. I think I might have just skipped a slide ahead, so we can see the previous slide, the 3 learning outcomes. Yes, here we go. Sorry, apologies for that. So we can see here that the 3 learning outcomes for Unit 2. So we have learning outcome 1, which is understand the work of recognised graphic designers. Learning outcome 2, produce a graphic design inspired by the work of a chosen graphic designer. So that will inevitably come from that research in learning outcome 1. And then learning outcome 3 is review the graphic design work. So it's up to centres how they wish to deliver this unit content. You may wish to split this into a series of formal lessons or practical workshops, or you may want to combine delivery with guest speakers or other relevant activities. Learners will then need to be set an internal assessment task, which David, very useful, shown us some examples there on the NCFE Qual Hub. And again, it's up to centres how they wish to issue the internal assessment task and the evidence that they require from learners. Some common and quite good examples are PowerPoint presentations or illustrated research reports. Again, some centres like to deliver all of the content first and then issue an assignment brief at the end. Some centres prefer to deliver the content of learning outcome 1 followed by an assignment, content for learning outcome 2 followed by assignment, and the same for learning outcome 3. So that will consist of 3 smaller assignments. So again, it's up to you as a centre. That's your decision to make with your assessment team, bearing in mind the needs of your learners there. Further to this, thinking of resources, learners do need to have access to a broad range of examples of recognised graphic designers. So this may require some tutor guidance that could also be placed into the assignment brief. However, learners should also be encouraged to find their own examples as well. So learning outcome 1, the first thing that learners will need to do in this unit is to choose a discipline to work in. So you can see here, there's 3 bullet points, which we refer to as assessment points on the screen. So these are the assessment points for learning outcome 1. So the first thing learners will need to do is choose a discipline. So sometimes we get a little bit of misinterpretation here, and centres think they have to sort of work in more than one discipline. And that's not true for this unit. They just have to choose one discipline to work in. And there's a range of disciplines listed in the unit specification. I think you'll find they're all covered from illustration, there's advertising graphics, branding, packaging graphics, and typography, and there is some more in there as well. So after they've chosen their discipline, they will need to then choose recognised graphic designers to undertake their research. And again, there are suggested graphic designers related to each of the disciplines in the unit specification that you can refer to. And this list is given to help teachers and learners to understand the level of recognition as expected for the listed disciplines. However, it's not a prescriptive or exhaustive list, so you can add to these if you wish. So these are the 3 areas, and you'll notice the final characteristic of design practice is for level 2 only. So thinking about level 1, the level 1 unit as well as the level 2, there is just additional content there that needs to be evidenced, which is the final bullet point there. The other 2 are for levels 1 and level 2. So here we can see the level 2 assessment criteria. Learners will undertake their research on their chosen graphic designers, and they'll collate and present this in the way that the teacher has requested in that internal assessment task. And at level 2, learners must demonstrate some understanding of the characteristics of the graphic designer's work. So visual examples are really useful here. So we quite often see learners talking about particular trait or characteristic of that graphic designer that they've been researching, and they find it quite useful, and it's good from an assessment and EQA perspective for them to use a visual example. It could be a screenshot with some annotations there of those particular characteristics. But again, that's just one way that you could present this evidence. Now, we do get quite a lot of questions regarding the difference between a format and a source. And the specification states that a format is the specific structure in which information or ideas are presented. So, for example, that could be a book, a journal, a website. And the actual source, again, this is from the specification, is where information or ideas are collected and made accessible. So, for example, it could be a review in a newspaper, it could be a documentary, a blog, a magazine article, an interview transcript, or an advert, etc. So there will be, and we do understand that there will be inevitably some crossover here because it is a research learning outcome. So try not to treat these entirely separately, but the aim of this learning outcome is to encourage broad research skills using different methods and not restricting learners to one area, such as the internet. So an example of what a pass might look like, learners could use information from a documentary and an interview. So that would be two different sources. But for a merit, learners could use images from a book. So first is the first format is the book here, and the images are one source. They could also have an interview from a website. That would be the second format, and the website and the interview. Sorry, the format would be the website, and the interview would be the source. So that's how that might look like in a merit. In addition to the merit, to achieve a distinction, learners must also comment on the credibility of the sources used. So, for example, here, credibility, they might explain the sources that they've used. Why are they current? Have they used an official website? Why is that particular source reliable, etc. But without that extra sort of evidence regarding credibility of sources, that the learner wouldn't be able to achieve a distinction for this learning outcome. And it's important to ensure learners reference the sources that they use for this learning outcome. And again, that's for level 1 and level 2 to encourage them to reference these sources. So here we can see the level 1 assessment criteria. Again, important to note here that the focus is on learners using information from different sources. So at least one for a pass, rather than explaining the characteristics of design practice, because that is a requirement for level 2. For a merit, there must be evidence of 2 different sources, and at distinction, they must also summarise information as well as use 2 different sources. And again, encouraging learners to reference these sources is good practice. I'm just going to pause to see if there's any questions that have come in for learning outcome 1.
No questions at the minute, Leslie.
Okay, that's great. Then we'll move on to learning outcome 2. So learning outcome 2 is about using the research and findings that they generated in learning outcome 1 as inspiration to create a piece of graphic design work, applying technical skills, processes, techniques, using equipment and appropriate materials and composition. One or more of these assessment points is likely to be evidenced within the development work as the learners create their final piece of work. So that final outcome, that final response that's been inspired by the research undertaken in Learning Outcome 1. So some centres like to use these as prompts within the assignment brief, within that internal assessment task, and learners like to sort of use these as headings, if you like. However, other approaches could be things like sketch pads, design sheets, where learners actually undertake the practical experimentation, and they could make some design notes, so they could have a progress diary of actually annotating and explaining the skills, processes, equipment, materials that they've used. And that works really well because it doesn't tend to have to be a separate piece of evidence. The most logical approach to do this is to allow learners a series of practical workshops. So straight away, once they start on this learning outcome, they're starting to actually demonstrate some practical skill application. And just to remind you that they only develop one piece of work within their chosen discipline. However, it is the standard of the skills applied that will differentiate between a pass, merit and distinction for this learning outcome 2, as this is about the practical application here. So here we can see the level 2 assessment criteria. It's good to mention here that development work should be evidenced. There should not be just the evidence of the final piece of work here, as learners do need to show how they've applied the required skills, materials and processes. So there should be some record. I think I referred to an example earlier, such as annotation for each of the required components. And if you remember the components referring back to Unit 1, these are colour, tone, line, composition, typography and imagery. So again, it should follow on quite naturally from the underpinning skills that they've already learned in Unit 1 to actually apply these. However, they've just got a slight more criteria because it needs to be influenced by a recognised graphic designer. And it's the selection and application of these skills, techniques, materials and processes that differentiates between the pass and merit criteria, together with how the final outcome is in response with their chosen designer. So just to clarify, the development and final work should represent this application of skills. So there's 2 parts to be evidenced for learning outcome 2. So it's not just the final work, but the development work of how they've actually got to that stage as well. So here we can see the level 1 assessment criteria. This may be slightly easier to interpret as it's mostly quantified regarding how many components learners are required to evidence. So I think we can see here for a pass, it's a minimum of 1 component to be evidenced. For a merit, a minimum of 2 graphic design components, and for a distinction, a minimum of 3. And at this level, we would not expect to see as much development work, but there should be some clear links to the research that they've undertaken in Learning Outcome 1, the chosen graphic designer as well, to be used as inspiration here. And I'll just pause again to see if there's any questions coming for Learning Outcome 2.
Just having a quick refresh. No questions has come in at the minute. So good to go on to Learning Outcome 3.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So Learning Outcome 3 is about learners evaluating their own work created in Learning Outcome 2. There's also some difference between Level 1 and Level 2 criteria. I'll just move on to the content here. So we can see the assessment points here. which are this bulleted list. So for level 2, we can see learners are required to evaluate 4 areas, whilst level 1 learners are required to evaluate just 2 learners there, 2 areas there within their reviews. And here we can see the level 2 assessment criteria. Pass, merit and distinction assessment criteria are dependent on how many of the 4 areas of review are evident within the evaluation. It's important to notice that the requirement for learners to clearly explain what improvements they would make for distinction. Really important to highlight this here, because without any reference to improvements for level 2, the unit grade for this learning outcome would be limited to a pass or merit. So they must have some reference to suggested improvements within their evaluation, and it can be improvements anywhere with anything. It needs to be a valid improvement. You know, it can be regarding technical skills or time management, but there needs to be some improvements referenced there to enable the distinction criteria to be achieved. And here we can see the level 1 assessment criteria, and this is focused on just 2 areas. So it was technical skills and the use of graphic design components. And important to notice here that both levels of evaluation, so levels 1 and 2, should be focused on learners' own skill development and the use of graphic design components. So this should not be a simple statement for strengths and weaknesses of what they did well and not so well. And that is quite a common interpretation for an evaluation. So learners should be encouraged to consistently relate their evaluations to the research in learning outcome 1 and the chosen graphic designer. And it's also quite common to see evaluative statements as part of the development process, for example, annotation within the evidence that learners produce for learning outcome 2, and this is perfectly fine as well. So again, just to reiterate, it's up to you as centres, as assessors, how you want to request the evidence for assessment from your learners, whether you want to do it maybe as a separate evaluation for this learning outcome, or you might want to combine the practical learning outcome 2 together with the evidence for evaluation that they could write in maybe notes, progress diary, or screenshots, etc. So that could be a combined approach for the evidence here. I'll just pause for any questions, David, before we move on to the samples of learners' work.
Again, no questions. I'm beginning to wonder if our question box is actually working. So if you could just type something in there and just make sure that it is fully working, even if it's just, yes, it's working, we're okay, or no questions right now, that'd be fine. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything and it is working. But no questions have come. Oh, yes, it is working. Thank you, Georgina. That's good to know. So,
I think as well, I think sometimes with Unit 2, it's actually quite clear. Well, the feedback that we get is quite clear to follow. So it's probably one of the less trickier units sometimes for learners, for centres to understand. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll move on to looking at an example of some pass work. And I'm just going to remind, so this learner got a pass for learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. It's just worth always reminding that if, for example, they didn't do so well in an evaluation for learning outcomes 3 and they didn't achieve the criteria for learning outcomes 3, they would actually not be able to pass the unit. They wouldn't be able to get an overall unit grade. So they may have done valid research for learning outcome 1, produce a final outcome with development work for learning outcome 2, but they didn't actually do a review. So that would mean they wouldn't be able to achieve a pass for learning outcome 3, so that the overall unit grade would be a not yet achieved there. So just to remind centres as well that there is a resubmission. Each internally assessed unit has a resubmission opportunity as well. So if they did miss any particular criteria that they didn't evidence, they can have a resubmission opportunity. So in the example I've just given, if it was the evaluation, they could just be given a resubmission for the evaluation. They wouldn't have to do the whole unit again. So they can use the same work and just submit the evidence that's missing there for the evaluation. So just a reminder there, and that's for all internally assessed units. So I'm just going to start to go through. So they've started off with, they've stated the discipline at the top, and this is the approach that they've done. So this was a PowerPoint presentation. Again, really popular format of evidence here. Learners at its levels 1 and 2, and sometimes level 3 actually, they really like to use PowerPoint to collate the evidence. I think it's something they find easy to do, and then they find it quite enjoyable, and they probably feel like it's presented well, and it looks good for them. So they've started to do some illustration research here, and they've got reference to some designers. And again, sometimes it can be, we do see a lot of copied and pasted evidence, and for this exercise, because it's research, we wouldn't sort of be worried about anything. Yes. Yeah.
Could you just check your mic connection there? The audio dropped out a little bit. I don't know if it's coming loose a little bit, your headset possibly.
Is that any better now?
It's fine. It was just now and again it seemed to suddenly just drop out. That's all.
Okay, it might be my internet connection. It's been okay though today. So, do you want me to repeat? Should I go back a slide, David, or did you think you managed to get it?
I think it's just this slide that audio seemed to drop out on. So if you could just start on this one again.
Okay.
Thanks.
So for this slide, even though we could suggest that the learners sort of copied and pasted some of this evidence here, that is okay, because we wouldn't be concerned that they're actually plagiarising anything at the moment. This is just an account of the research for Learning Outcome 1, so that's fine. Again, they've got some further research here. Same graphic designer. Moved on to another for the second here. Again, just some simple references. We're not looking for sort of Harvard reference, and the fact that they've just put a web link there from where they've got the sources is fine, is sufficient. So again, a good illustration here of annotation, so we can start to see the learner's own thoughts coming through here based on the research that they've undertaken and how they might use that evidence. So they've started now to use appropriate language, which is good in their annotations here. And then they've got some examples, specific examples here. So this is another way, I think I referred to earlier, which is quite common, is to have some screenshots of the students using software, and then they sort of put them into PowerPoint or a Word document, and then actually create these annotations. And it's really a good way because, if they think about techniques, materials and processes, they can say what techniques they've chosen and why, and together with any other materials. So really important, if you remember for Learning Outcome 2, that we see some development work as well. What it shouldn't be is just the final response speaking for itself. There should be some development work to support that process. And then again, we've got the evaluation at the end here. So I realise I've probably gone through that quite quickly as well. So that was the pass, but there is opportunity to download these as well to go through in your own time, which is definitely something I always recommend to do, you know, to sit with the assessment criteria and take a look at these. And we'll just move on now to the distinction work. And again, this example will have had to have a distinction for learning outcome 1, 2 and 3 in order to get the overall grade of a distinction. So just again, a reminder, maybe if they did quite a basic evaluation, or maybe they didn't refer to improvements, then they wouldn't be able to get a distinction for that learning outcome 3. So that would mean if they got a distinction for learning outcome 1 for the research, as well as learning outcome 2 for the final outcome and development work, if they didn't achieve that distinction for learning outcomes 3, then that grade, the overall unit grade, would be limited to either a pass or a merit, depending on what the other criteria were there. So to get a unit grade distinction, they must get a distinction for learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. So again, they've started off a similar approach as the other learner to collate their research. And again, they put some web links there of where they've got their resources from. And again, they've started to use some subject terminology here as well with the annotations. Some initial ideas here. So again, students don't have to, they have the choice, dependent on the resources that they've got access to, whether they want to do sort of use traditional techniques, physical techniques, or digital, or they can just produce all digital or all physical work. It's completely up to the learners and the centre. They can use a combination of both, or just one area. So they've got some designs here, logo designs. Typography development. Again, same approach using software. So they took a screenshot within the software application and annotated to try and explain what they've done and the techniques that they've used. So quite a broad range of experimentation here. Really good to include variations, really good to support the development work, that they've actually looked at alternative ideas, alternative approaches. And again, they've actually talked about their improvements here with some visual examples, which again, it's a good way. It's just one way to approach that particular evaluation task. and then they've got their final response here. And then quite a detailed evaluation here. And again, just because sometimes a learner might produce sort of 2 or 3 pages of evaluation, that doesn't always mean that that would be valid for a distinction. Again, it's the quality and meeting those particular criteria within that evaluation, rather than how many pages, you know, rather than the quantity. And again, it's, you know, that they've got lots of other evaluative statements within their development work as well. So that must also be considered when thinking about the assessment criteria for learning outcome 3. So again, I realised I did go through that quite quickly, but again, we can have an opportunity to download these to take away for your own time. So I don't know if there's any questions, David, that have come in.
No questions that I can see on here at the minute. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch this poll again, just to see if any confidence has changed. In the meantime, do please pop any questions that you might have into that question box. And it doesn't have to be about Unit 2. If it's something about the upcoming teacher assessed grades, yes, or midwife learners or and stuff like that.
EQA process, because I realise I've referred a few times here to EQA, which is your external quality assurer for centres. And if you're new, sometimes we have some terms and jargon that we understand, but you may not. So any questions regarding the EQA process as well, please let us know. I think it might be good, David, as well, just to remind, I think you might have you demonstrated last time. So as well as these webinars, there's actually a few from last year and the year before for this unit.
Absolutely. I'll pull up YouTube. Yeah. I'll just close off this poll right now. Looks like everyone's in the 5 or above range, 5 to 6, 67% in 7 to 8 range. So hopefully that's improved from where you were. And we'll just show you our YouTube channel. So if you did just go on to YouTube, you can just search for NCFE and you will find, you'll go straight to our channel, and we do actually have a vCerts playlist where all of these sort of webinars, and I've tried to organize it so all the graphic ones are all together in this playlist. Same for interactive media, music technology, and these sort of subject specific ones. I've tried to keep them together. So if we just search for NCFE, be able to see the sorts of videos I've been looking at the minute. So just get onto the NCFE page. And here we have the NCFE YouTube channel.
Yeah, and what they're useful for, the previous ones are really useful because there's always different examples of learners' work. So different approaches that different centres take. So there's not just one approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our training for schools and vCerts playlist on here. And as Leslie said, there is, I'm losing track of actually how many we have. Leslie has done quite a few of these. So here we have graphic design that I've tried to group together, like I said. So unit one that was done in just January, another unit one, all showing examples of learners' work. So as well as the one that's happened today for unit 2, there's 2 previous ones, one from November 2019, April 2019 on there as well. So quite a few other examples of graphic design on there, including one talking about the external assessment as well. So that is quite useful. And we will have webinars coming up soon in terms of COVID response and submitting tags for vCerts as well. So when you go to ncfe.org.uk, straight away that black banner emphasizing COVID-19 response. We do have our support for you, just as you scroll down. And this was emailed out to centres as well. But on here, you'll be able to sign up for the webinars. So on April 1st, so 2 days. On Thursday, there is one for the approach to awarding for VCerts from 12, but these recordings as well will still be added to that YouTube channel too. I'm just gonna put this on and have a look, see if any questions have come through since then. No question, everyone seems to be quite happy, I guess, with Unit 2 work. Well, if you are, I will stay on here for the remaining 15 minutes or so, unless everyone leaves, then I won't stay on here for 15 minutes. But if you are leaving, there's going to be a little evaluation that pops up. Really appreciate if you just take multiple choice questions. If you wouldn't mind filling that in, that would really help inform us for anything we do in the future. If you have any questions that come up as a result of this, you can contact me directly, David Kiernan at ncfe.org.uk, or if I'm unavailable, curriculum@ncfe.org.uk. Just in case no questions come through, I would like to thank Leslie. Thank you again for your support with all these webinars. And we have another one tomorrow for our interactive media.
We do, yeah.
Yes, indeed. So thank you to everyone for attending. And as I said, I'll remain on here. I'll mute myself for now. But if you don't have any questions or have no further queries, just wishing you a very safe and successful year.